I just love learning new things, especially when it comes to command line tips and tricks. When I did the previous video where I gave you over 15 examples of terminal tricks, you guys really seemed to like that video. So I figured it was time to do a sequel to give you guys even more terminal tips and tricks that you could use to enhance your workflow. So what I'm going to do in today's video is give you guys 10 more command line tips and tricks that you can absolutely use, and you're going to love these. Now, to be fair, the command line is really not required, that's a myth. But why wouldn't you want to use the command line? It's awesome and it's fun. And it's about to get even more fun as I show you the additional examples that I'm going to go through in this video. But before I get into that, I'll just need to take a moment to mention the sponsor for today's video, Linode. I mean, wouldn't it be really cool if we had a cloud server provider that was all about Linux? Maybe even a cloud provider that didn't have a billing system that was tedious to learn, or even a provider that doesn't have an interface that takes an entire certification track to learn. Well, actually, we already have that. We have Linode. Linode doesn't have any of the problems that I've just mentioned. Their billing is very simple and easy to understand. And their dashboard is also very straightforward, so much so that you'll have your very own Linux server up and running in minutes. No certification prep book required. And speaking of setting up your very own Linux servers, if you use the URL that you see on the screen right now, it won't even cost you anything to check it out. That URL in particular will get you $100 in free credit towards your new account, and that credit will last up to 60 days. And considering that Linode has Linux instances that start at just $5 a month, that means you could fit a whole lot of Linux within that credit. And Linode is awesome. They're the official cloud provider for Learn Linux TV because every public-facing website for this channel all runs on Linode. So I really appreciate them sponsoring this video like they've done for many others. That's really awesome. I just really appreciate that. They're an awesome company, and I definitely recommend that you check them out. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into my list of 10 tricks that you can use to boost your workflow on the command line. Now, the first trick that I'm going to show you is all about installing packages, but doing so in a much simpler way. Myself in particular, I've installed countless packages on Linux machines, so much so that I bet if I had a count of every keystroke, it would be a monumental number. But later on, I picked up a trick that can condense your distribution's package manager command down to just one letter. Seriously? Don't believe me? Well, see for yourself. Let's go ahead and install tmux. Wait a minute, that was really fast. What did I do? Well, actually, I ran that command right there. I ran the I command. I for install. Well, it works out in my mind anyway. But as you can see, that was a very simple command. I just typed the letter I, space, and then the name of the package that I actually want to install. But how did I set that up? And also, why didn't I need to use sudo? Don't you normally need to use sudo to install a package on a Linux distro? Well, actually, what you just saw was an illusion, or actually, an alias. Aliases allow you to basically create your own commands. Here's how that works. Let's say you wanted to create a command called install because you can't remember the name of your distro's package manager. I know that's not the greatest example, but just keep following along. You'll like this one. Anyway, to set up an alias to create your very own command, what you'll do is type the word alias into the terminal. And then after that, you type the name of the alias or whatever you want it to be called. So I could just simply type install. That's a pretty cool name for an install command. And we're going to set that equal to something in double quotes. And what I'm going to set that equal to is sudo apt install because I'm running on Ubuntu in my case. So I'll press enter. And now what I could do is type install and then tmux. But I've already installed it as you've just seen me do. But now you should understand exactly what I did. I created an alias, and in my case, I called it I. And to shorten the command, what I did was I just gave it a shorter name. You just saw me create an alias called install, but all I had to do was create an alias called I. You can name your alias whatever you want, and I think I is as simple as it gets. So with this alias, anytime I type I and then press enter, what I'm actually executing in the terminal is sudo apt install space. And even if you're not on Ubuntu, this will still work. You could be on Arch Linux, CentOS, it doesn't matter. Whatever your distro's package manager command happens to be, you can simply create an alias around that command. And from that point forward, you can simply type I, space, and the package name, and then the package installs, just like that. And you know what? Here's another example. What I'm going to do is create another alias. In this one, I'm going to simply name E for editor. So you could probably already understand the direction that I'm going with this. Anyway, right here inside the double quotes, we just type whatever editor we plan on using, whatever your favorite happens to be. So if you like Nano, for example, you could just set the E alias to Nano, just like that. And then when you want to edit a text file, you just simply type E and then the name of the file that you want to edit. So I'll press enter and check it out. Now I'm editing a file, the file that I gave as an argument. And I didn't even need to type out the name of the editor itself. I just simply typed E, and that was it. That's all I had to do. Now, one potential problem here is that as soon as I close my terminal window, the aliases will drop. They'll be gone. And if I want to get those back, unfortunately, I'm going to have to create them all over again. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound very fun. But thankfully, there's a quick and easy workaround to make sure that those aliases are automatically recreated every time we open a new terminal window. So what I'll do is type E for the editor alias. I didn't close my terminal window yet, I still have it. And the file that I want to edit is actually in my home directory, and the name of that file is .bashrc, just like that. That's actually the config file for bash. So let's open that up. And then we can go all the way to the very bottom of this file. Depending on which distro you're using, the default bashrc might be completely different than what you're seeing here. But what's inside the file doesn't actually matter right now. All we want to do is just add our aliases right here. So for example, what we could do is just type out the command that we used originally to create the alias in the first place, but we're adding it inside this file instead. So again, that was alias, and then the name or what you want the alias to be called. In this case, I'll just use I again, and I'll set that equal to sudo apt install space, and then I'll close the double quotes. And I'll save the file and exit out. Now, every single time I open a new terminal window or a new session inside the server that I'm actually connected to right now, then that alias is going to be recreated for me. It's always going to be there, and that's the way I like it. So let me know in the comments down below if you have any really cool aliases that you think people should know about. I'd be interested to see what you guys come up with. All right, so it's time for my second terminal trick. And this one has to do with weather. Weather is something that we talk about a lot here in Michigan because our weather is just so weird. One moment it's, July, it's super hot and we're wearing shorts and enjoying some time at the beach. And the next thing you know, it's winter and we're dealing with thunder snow. And yeah, thunder snow is a thing. The weather's weird. So here in Michigan, we're always checking the weather. But what does weather have to do with terminal tricks? Well, actually, you could check the weather right in your terminal. I'll show you. So let's go ahead and see what the weather forecast is for today. I'll just type WTR, short for weather, and then I'll press enter. Wait a minute. It's actually showing me the weather forecast for my area. Right now, it's actually looking like the weather is quite nice. And we also see a forecast for days that are coming up. So yeah, I was absolutely able to check the weather for my particular location. But how did I do that? Well, if you guessed that the WTR command is an alias, then you guessed correctly. What we can do to find out what an alias contains is run the alias command, and then we type the name of the alias that we want to check. In this case, I created WTR. Now notice that I'm not setting it to be equal to something. I've already done that. So if I don't include an equal sign, what it's going to do instead of creating an alias is show me what the current one is actually doing. And there it is. I'm running curl space wttr.in. Now curl is actually a utility you could use to transfer information from a URL. So that's what that's doing. But what is wttr.in? If you're under the impression that that's probably a domain, well, you're right. That's actually a legit domain. You can actually type that domain right into your browser, and it'll give you the forecast. But since that particular website is terminal friendly, if I pull the contents of that website, then it's going to display it right in the terminal. and it actually takes a look at my location as well, which is really helpful. I don't even need to give it any arguments. I simply type WTR, and the weather shows up in my terminal. How cool is that? Now, my third terminal trick is actually really simple, and it barely even deserves its own number on this list, but it is very useful, and it is something that you'll run into every now and then. Now, I don't currently have the problem going on right now, but have you ever used a terminal and then noticed that there's these junk characters or maybe sizing issues, font issues, or just something weird going on? Now, if you've ever experienced that problem, what you may have done is close out your terminal window and reopen it. And to be fair, that does actually fix it. But you don't have to close your terminal window just to fix that problem if it happens. What you could do instead is simply type reset, just like that. And when I press enter, well, the prompt went away and it came back. What exactly happened? Well, unlike what the name of that command, the reset command, would imply, that wasn't a full reset. But it does reset enough of your session to fix those terminal issues that sometimes happen. So if you ever run into that, then the solution is to simply run the reset command. And that's about it. Aren't these terminal tricks a lot of fun? I have a bunch more to show you guys, and I can't wait to get right into it. So let's check out the next terminal trick that I want to show you guys.
Hey, Dad, you got a minute?
Can you hold on a few minutes? I'm actually recording a video right now.
Yeah, but I'm trying to turn in a book report and the internet's being really slow.
Oh, really? Okay, no problem. I'll take a look at it and I'll let you know what I find. So apparently the internet is actually slowing down, so I just need to run a quick speed test to find out if it's actually a problem with my provider or if maybe something else is going on. So let's run a speed test. I'll just run the st command, short for speed test. Clever, I know, right? But let's see what it does. Well, the speed looks good to me. That's about what I'd expect to receive from a speed test, so it doesn't appear like my internet provider is the problem. And considering that my ISP is Comcast, I pretty much always assume they're the problem. I think this is the one time where Comcast is not the culprit. So it looks like the internet's fine. I'm not really sure what it is, but maybe there's some interference in your room or something. You might want to just check and make sure there's nothing in front of the access point. Okay, so how the heck did I run a speed test from my terminal? Well, let's take a look at that alias. I created the st alias before I started recording the video, and here's what that's set to. Now that's actually a long command. I'll have a blog post linked down below in the description, and inside there we'll have all the commands that I'm using inside this video. But what's basically going on here is the st alias is running curl, and the argument -s, it's running that against a URL that's a Python script, and then it's redirecting that into Python 3. Now on your end, depending on the distribution that you're using, you might have to change the name of Python 3 to just Python. Each distribution names their Python binaries differently. But anyway, at the very end of the command, I have a single trailing hyphen as well. You definitely want to make sure that that's included. Now also note that I used single quotes instead of double quotes, but you know what? It doesn't really matter in this case. It does pretty much the same thing. And this particular Python script lives in GitHub. As you can see right here, it's coming from a GitHub URL. And that's just something that's maintained there in the repository that I'm pulling down. But all I'm doing is pulling down that one file and redirecting it into Python. That's all there is to it. So with this particular alias, what I'm able to do is actually run a real speed test. That's awesome. So the next thing that I'm going to show you guys how to do is pull a summary of some information about the server that you're connecting to. In fact, we have a dedicated command that allows you to do exactly that. There's the neofetch command. And no, I didn't create this as an alias. This is actually the command that you'll need to enter to pull this information. But you will need to install this package. So what you'll need to do first is use your distribution's package manager to make sure that this package is installed. In my case, on Ubuntu, that's simply sudo apt install, and then neofetch. I don't need to install it because I already have it. So let's run it. Check that out. It shows me an ASCII logo for my distribution. It lets you know the specific version of the distribution that I'm running. The host, this is a virtual machine running in Proxmox. It also gives me the kernel, the number of hours of uptime, how many packages are installed. This is just so cool. It's very useful. But what I like is to have this actually show up when I SSH into a server for the first time. I mean, it's cool to run the neofetch command manually. There's nothing wrong with that, but I would prefer to have that show up automatically. So one way that we can accomplish that is by editing the .bashrc file, the same file that we edited earlier to make aliases stay present on the system. We could just use a text editor like Nano, for example. And again, we'll edit the .bashrc file. We can go all the way down to the very end. It really doesn't matter, but I like to create everything at the end just to make it simpler. And here we have the alias that we've created earlier. So what I'll do is just simply type neofetch right there. That's it. Let's save the file. And then I'll hold Control and press D to disconnect from this server. And now I'm actually back to my local command prompt here on my laptop. And as an aside, you're actually seeing my real bash prompt now that I'm on my local computer. And I will be showing you how to set up that particular bash prompt later in this video. But anyway, what I want to do is reconnect to that test server that I was using for the recording of this video. I added the neofetch command in the .bashrc file, so let's see if it comes up automatically. And it does. Check that out. How cool is that? So all you have to do is install neofetch, add it to your .bashrc file, and then the next time you log into that server, then it's going to give you some helpful information regarding that server. We're moving right through these terminal tricks. We're about halfway done now, but the best is yet to come. Now the next one is something that you guys have been asking me for quite a while now. You guys want to know how I set up my bash prompt, and you even caught a glimpse of it in the previous section, but how exactly did I set that up? Well, what I'm going to do right now is show you exactly that. So here on my test server, what I'm going to do is reproduce my bash prompt to show you guys how to set it up. So if you want to clone my bash prompt, then this section is for you. So what we're going to do is create a brand new config file. So we'll just use a text editor, and the file that we'll create is going to be in our home directory. And what I'll do is name it .bash_prompt, just like that. And since the file doesn't exist, we're going to be creating this from scratch, but I'm going to warn you, this is going to look extremely confusing if you aren't already familiar with how the PS1 prompt in Bash works. You're going to see a bunch of weird characters all over the screen. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste the bash prompt config directly into this file, and I recommend that you do the same thing because as many characters as there's going to be, it's very easy to have a typo. And here it is. This is the actual configuration for my bash prompt. Now, like I mentioned, it's extremely confusing, especially for those of you that have never worked with this before. So what I recommend is that you copy it directly from the blog post for this video. That way you don't have to worry about there being any typos. And of course, the text is wrapping off to the right side here on the last line. So as we can see, there's a lot more config here than what actually shows up in the default Nano window. But anyway, what I recommend you do, again, is just copy it from the blog post, and it makes it that much easier. Now, what I normally like to do is explain everything that I'm doing, but I think this one kind of goes into a direction that would be really hard to explain in this video without it being its own video. So I don't know if I'm going to create an entire video about customizing the bash prompt. Let me know if you want to see that in the comments down below. But considering that I have the config right here, I'll just go ahead and let you guys have this config. And if you want to clone my bash prompt, well, this is how you do it. Anyway, I'll save the file. And there's one more change that we have to make. So what I'll do is also edit the .bashrc file as well, because if we don't tell it to load the file that we've just created, then Bash has no idea that that file even exists. Now the first thing we're going to do in this file is take a look through it and find where the current bash prompt is actually being set. What we're going to do is comment that out. So we'll just scroll through, and we're looking for PS1. That's actually what the bash prompt is called. It's the PS1 prompt. And right here we have it. So what I'm going to do is just comment out everything that pertains to setting the bash prompt. And that'll make sure that this doesn't conflict with what we're going to add at the end of the file. And next, I'll just scroll down to the very end of the file. And what I'll do is type source, and then I'll type the path to that bash prompt file that we've just created. And there it is. So I'll save the file. I'll exit out. And then I'll clear the screen. And the next time I log into this particular server, my bash prompt will be my normal bash prompt. Now, to cheat the system a little bit, what I'll do is type exec and then bash to get a brand new bash session without logging out and logging in again. And take a look at that. Neofetch shows up from the previous tip where I showed you guys how to set up neofetch. But at the very end, we have my actual bash prompt. So again, if you guys wanted to clone my bash prompt, well, now you can, because you have access to the code that I use to create the same one that I use every day. But I do feel that some explanation of what I have going on in my bash prompt is in order. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that it shows the time, but that's actually not a real-time clock at all. In fact, that's not the real time. What that actually is the time that the previous command actually finished. So if I was to run the ls command, for example, we can see that that command finished at 18:42:39. Now, if I run another command, same thing. It's showing me the time that that particular command has finished. Why is that helpful? Well, as you scroll through the scroll back in your terminal, this will actually show you the times that the commands finished, which gives you basically an estimated time about when you ran the command. So if you're looking for a command that you ran during a specific time in your session, when you scroll through the history, you're going to see the time because it's right there in the bash prompt. And believe me, it might not sound useful to some of you, but just give it a shot and you'll actually realize just how useful having the time in your bash prompt happens to be. And if you're like me, you won't want to live without it. But that's not all that this particular bash prompt does. Now pay attention to the next section. There's actually 3 sections here in brackets, by the way. The first one was the clock. The second one is the number 0 in blue. What the heck is that? Well, check this out. What I'm going to do is open up a config file. Let's say, for example, that I want to edit the SSH server, the SSH server config. And you don't have to follow along with this. I'm just giving you guys an example. So let's just say I want to edit that file, which is /etc/ssh/sshd_config. And what you're editing or doing really doesn't matter here. I'm just giving you an example. Anyway, I'll press enter. Now let's say, for example, I'm editing this file right here. And then somebody taps me on the shoulder. They want me to work on something else. Maybe there's a server issue that I need to pay attention to. Now, what I don't want to do is lose the work that I'm doing inside this text editor. What I also don't want to do is open up another terminal window, because the next thing you know, I'll have a bunch of them. Now, what I do in practice is I will actually minimize what I'm working on to do something else. I've gone over this in previous videos, among them the actual video that this video is a sequel to. I actually talked about it in that video, so I'm just summarizing it here. But what I could do is hold Control and press Z, and that backgrounds the process. It's kind of like minimizing, not completely the same thing, but it's close enough. Now notice that the number, which was previously 0, is now 1. What that's doing is it's showing me the number of background jobs that I have. So that way, when I go to log out of a server, and if I see that there's a number there that's not 0, then I know that I have some things in the background that I should probably bring back, save the file or whatever it is that I have to do, and then when that number gets back to 0, I can log out. Now, as an aside, if I want to get back something that I've minimized or backgrounded, I just type FG for foreground, and it comes back. And again, Control Z is what sent it to the background in the first place. So what I could be doing, for example, is editing another file. And I'm just going to bring up the hostname file because, well, I guess it's something. And I'll minimize that too. Now the number is 2. Now if I type jobs, it gives me a list of the jobs that I have in the background. If I want to foreground something in particular, I could type FG and then the job number. And that's what gets it back onto the screen. And then when I want to log out for the day, I close out of whatever I'm working on. Now we're down to 1 background job. Since we only have 1, I don't need to give it a number. So I just typed FG. Let's close out of that one. And now I'm back down to 0. So that's why I find the job count to be so helpful, because I always know how many things I've backgrounded, and then I could do some cleanup when my session is about to end. Now, the next thing that I like about this particular prompt is that the directory is shown in blue toward the end. We see the host name, and then we see the directory. Now, at first, it might not look all that exciting. I mean, pretty much every default bash prompt shows the directory that you're working inside of, right? I mean, that's just how it works. Now, watch what happens when I change directories. Randomly, I'm just going to go into the var log directory. Now, it's showing the entire directory. Most of the bash prompts will only show you the actual directory you're in, not the full path, just the directory that you're in. So in this case, it would just show log instead of the full path. But I have mine configured to show the full path. Why do I like that so much? Well, let's assume that I'm inside of a subdirectory that's 5 directories deep. Most of the bash prompts out there, they default to have everything on the same line. So when you go to type a command, you're typing it on the same line that the directory is printed on. If you're very deep inside a subdirectory tree, then that line can get quite long. But in my case, I have the cursor on the line below it, which leaves the entire line above it to show the directory, and it gives me a lot more room. I really don't run into situations where I run out of room at all. Commands are typed on its own line. I have the bash prompt basically as a status bar of sorts on the line above where I type the command, and for me, it works out well. So consider giving my bash prompt a shot. It might come in handy. Now we're up to tip number 7. And this time around, what I'm going to do is teach you guys how to cheat. Well, actually, I'm going to show you guys how to check cheat sheets. And these cheat sheets will contain all kinds of useful information when it comes to Linux commands. Does that sound familiar? Well, if you're familiar with man pages, then everything I'm telling you so far probably sounds like I'm about to show you how to check man pages. And while man pages are useful, that's not what I'm going to show you. But for those of you that haven't seen man pages yet, I'll show you a quick man page right now. Man is short for manual, and let's say, for example, that I might want to view the man page for the rsync command. Now, man pages are awesome. They're definitely a great resource for finding information about any of the commands that you can enter on the Linux command line. But if you're the type of person that gets easily overwhelmed, then man pages might be, well, overwhelming. Let's check out another method that we can use to pull information about a command. So what I'm going to do is use curl, and I'm going to point it to a very special URL, specifically cheat.sh. After the trailing slash here, we could type the name of a command that we want to view a cheat sheet regarding. So I was using rsync as an example, so I'll type that. Now take a look at this. How cool is this? This information right here is condensed, it's easy to read, it's simple, and it's right to the point. This is definitely something that I recommend you guys remember because this information is extremely helpful. And like I said, it's just a lot easier to read. So I definitely recommend that you jot this down in your notes because cheat.sh is very useful. But in addition to rsync, we could type, well, other commands here. So what I'll do is replace rsync with, I don't know, let's try ls. And here we have some examples regarding ls. And that's awesome. But I'll leave it up to you guys to experiment with this. See if you could pull up some other cheat sheets for commands that you use on a regular basis. And as an aside, cheat.sh is actually a real URL. You can go there in your browser and view the same pages. So while this is technically a terminal tip, cheat.sh is actually developed to look good in a terminal. But, well, if you have a web browser in front of you and you don't have a terminal handy, you can still get information via cheat.sh. So next what I'm going to do is teach you guys how to get your fortune told. Seriously. And for this, what we're going to need to do is install another package. So in the case of Ubuntu and Debian, what I'll do is run sudo apt and then install. And the name of the package for this particular tip is fortunemod. So I'll press enter. And now it's installed. But what can we actually do with fortunemod? Well, to be completely honest with you guys, not a whole lot. This is actually the most useless tip in this entire list, and it offers you no value whatsoever, at least when it comes to your productivity. So what does it actually do then? Well, I'll run it, and then you'll see for yourself. Even though the package was named fortune mod, we actually only need to run the fortune command. And it's telling me that a vivid and creative mind characterizes me. And considering that I'm, creating a video right about now, this is surprisingly accurate. But it's a complete coincidence, to be fair. What this command does is it just gives you a random message that it pulls from its dictionary of messages that it can show you. So even though the name of the package is fortune mod, it can indeed read you your fortune, but there's different categories of messages that it reads out to you, so it's not always going to be your fortune that's being told. It might just show you something funny, maybe something encouraging, and also possibly something insulting. So here's the thing. Neither myself or Learn Linux TV accepts any responsibility for anything that the fortune command or the fortune mod package might show you in your terminal. The thing is, I haven't had enough time to go through the source code and look through every single message that it might show you. So basically, this particular command is limited for those of you that have a very specific sense of humor. And if you're among those people, then you know who you are. But if you do like the fortune command, then what you can do is pair it with the watch command, and what that'll end up giving you is a brand new message every 2 seconds. And as you see, it just keeps going and going and going. It can be a lot of fun, but again, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether this is right for you. And if you really want to go crazy with this, you could actually just consider adding this to your .bashrc file and get a new quote every time you log into your server. So the fortune command was certainly very interesting, but let's return to useful tips and tricks, unlike the previous one, which was just there for amusement. And actually, I'm going to show you the ultimate productivity hack on the Linux command line, something that will possibly transform your workflow more than anything else. But before I actually describe it, I'm going to show you a hypothetical scenario that'll probably make it very obvious why this is so cool, and that trick is tmux. Using tmux will add quite a bit of benefit to your workflow, and I'll show you an example of that. On the screen right now, I'm actually working on a Python script. Now, to be fair, this is a very old script, and I'm only showing it here just to have an example to show you, but let's just say, for example, I'm working on a Python script, maybe something like the one that you're seeing right here. But what happens when someone comes over to my desk or something like that and asks me to help them out with something? Now, a few times already, I showed you guys how to minimize your workflow and switch to something else. And that was definitely a great way to do it. But this is an even better way to do it. So let's say that I have to context switch for one reason or another, and I need to take a break from this particular Python script. So I'll just switch to another project. And I actually have a few different projects that I'm working on here. If I arrow through the projects that I have open, what you'll see is a preview in the bottom half of the terminal window of what's actually going on inside that session. So maybe I want to get back to Ansible because I have something to do there. So I have an Ansible session open. So I'll press enter on that. And now I'm actually editing a play that's going to be used with my Ansible configuration. This one in particular is installing the GNOME web browser, and I have a whole video series about Ansible, so I'm not going to get into what exactly I'm doing here, because if you want to learn Ansible, I got you covered. I have a whole playlist that's full of Ansible videos, and you could check out those videos to learn all about Ansible. But the point is, by using tmux, my workflow is incredibly enhanced. And another example of that is the ability to create tabs. So now I have another terminal window here, and I could just go through the different tabs that I have open, and I could also scroll through the various projects that I have open. And that's really awesome. And another thing that tmux allows me to do is disconnect from whatever I'm working on completely and go back to the terminal. And then I can run tmux ls to show a list of sessions even without tmux being open. And then I could use tmux a-t and then the name of the session that I want to resume. And then I'm right back in that session as if I've never left that session. And actually, I never really left this session at all. I might have detached from it, but it never changed state in the background. It was still there and its state was maintained. That's one of the many things that tmux allows you to do. Now, to be fair, a lot of terminal emulators out there offer you the ability to create tabs, and some of them even allow you to create splits in the window as well, which is what I'm doing here. But the beauty of tmux is that it doesn't require a specific terminal emulator, and it also doesn't even require that you have a graphical user interface at all. And that portability is what, in my opinion, makes tmux the killer app for your Linux terminal. And it's not even just specific to Linux. I mean, for those of you that are running Mac OS, because I know at least some of you are using a Mac, you could run tmux on Mac as well. If you're using WSL, well, just apt install tmux and just start using it. So tmux looks really awesome, doesn't it? So how do you use it? Well, actually, I have an entire tutorial series all about tmux that'll teach you everything you need to know. So I'm not going to go through that in this video, but if you are interested, I'll leave a card for the first video in that series right about here, and you can watch that video and the subsequent videos that come after it to learn all about tmux. And I recommend that you do because tmux is awesome. Now, the next tip that I'm going to show you guys is how to open files and programs from the Linux terminal. Now, when I say programs in this context, I'm not talking about command line apps. I'm referring to desktop apps. So, for example, let's say that I wanted to open Audacity. What I could do is open up the application menu here on my distribution. I could go through the menu. I could find Audacity probably in the multimedia section and then open it up. But that was a lot of steps. Watch how fast this is. And now Audacity is open on my screen like you can see here. I was able to open that app right from my terminal. Now, of course, any application that you might want to open needs to be installed. Otherwise, how can you open something that's not present? But even though I'm using a desktop distribution here, I'm still able to use the terminal to do everything, including opening an app, which you've just seen me do. So I'll just go ahead and close out of this right here. And I'm back to the terminal. Now, one downside to this particular approach is that you'll see a lot of information in the terminal, and it also makes it really hard to use your terminal if you have your terminal open alongside an application. However, I am going to show you how to work around that in just a moment, but there's another thing that I want to show you guys first before we get to that. And the next part of this particular trick is the xdg open command, like you see here. And this command is very useful for those of you that are running a desktop distribution of Linux. If Linux is your daily driver, you're going to love this one. What you can use xdg open for is for opening files. But specifically, what it's going to do is open the file in the default application that is registered for that file type. And as an example, what I'm going to do is show you a PDF file of a draft for my new Ubuntu book that's coming out pretty soon. That's already out right now by the time you're seeing this video. But this is actually a real project that I'm working on right now. But you could use this against any file type that you have on your file system that is recognized by your distribution. So in my projects directory, I have a writing directory. Inside there, I have a directory for the latest version of my book. And then under chapters, I have a folder for each chapter. So I'll go into chapter 1. And there's the file. So what I'll do is press enter and watch what happens. And as you can see here, the file opened. And not only did the file open, it opened in the proper application. It opened in a PDF viewer. So now that I have the file open, I can read through it. I could create some notes or annotations if I needed to, if I found any errors or anything like that. And then when I'm done, I just email my publisher and let them know. But I was able to do that right here from the terminal, which is awesome. But again, we're dealing with this junk information right here, which, I don't know, it just looks bad to me. It's useful information, but it's probably too much information most of the time. Let's see how we can go ahead and fix this particular problem. So I'll just open up tmux. And I'll name the session, and I have all the instructions for how to do this in my tmux series. But I'll just give this particular session a name. I'll just call it App Launcher. I think that works just fine. And then what I'll do is create another session. So I disconnected from that one. I'll create a new one. Then I'll name this one Work. I guess because, I don't know, maybe I just want to get something done inside this terminal window. Anyway, what I could do now is switch to the other session and go to the App Launcher. I'll type Audacity and then ampersand. You have to include the ampersand at the end, just letting you know. I forgot to mention that earlier, that backgrounds the process. But even though it backgrounds the process in the terminal, it still shows up on the screen. And then I could tab back to the terminal window here and then switch sessions over to my work session. And now I don't have to worry about all those junk characters showing up while I'm working because I have all of those characters in the App Launcher session. And that's a session that I'll completely ignore unless I actually want to launch something. Now, one thing that you guys should know is if you close the terminal window or the session that you launched the application from, the application will close. And to show you, I'll simulate that right now. So I'll just go back to my App Launcher session and I'll just close it. And notice that Audacity went away immediately when I killed that session. And again, the same thing is true if you don't use tmux and you use a straight terminal session. If you close your terminal window, all of the applications that you've run from that window will also close. But that is actually easily solved. So what I'll do is just launch Audacity again. And I'm not really sure why I'm thinking of Audacity enough to use it as an example. Maybe because I know I have to edit some of the audio for this video after I'm done recording. But anyway, Audacity is now running. And what I'm going to do is close this terminal window, but I'm going to close it by holding Control and pressing D. But the window is actually stuck open. That's fine. I'll just close it right now. And the app stayed open. It didn't close. Now, when you hold Control and press D on a terminal, that actually disconnects you. But to keep it simple, Control D does so in a way that won't cause all of the applications to close. They'll stay open. And the reason why that works is because we added an ampersand to the end of the command, which backgrounds the process that launched that particular application. And then when we disconnect from the terminal by holding Control and pressing D, then we close it in such a way that the application is no longer reliant on that terminal window. So the ampersand and Control D together is what makes that possible. But using this approach right here, you actually don't even need an application menu anymore. Well, as long as you already know the name of the application that you want to launch. But it's a cool tip, especially for those of you that want to launch something in a pinch and you're already in a terminal, then why not just launch your application from the terminal? And you know what? That brings us to the end of this particular video. I had a ton of fun making this video and coming up with these particular tricks for you guys. Now, if you found these tips helpful, then please consider clicking that like button. That lets YouTube know that there really does need to be more Linux-related content on YouTube. There's actually not even enough of that, and it's really sad. So click the like button if you like this video. Let's float Linux to the top of the charts on YouTube. That would be really cool. If nothing else, it would really help me out. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, then feel free to do so. I release new content every single week. Anyway, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.